Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the ongoing Napoleon series from Epic History TV. This is, if I counted correctly, part 7 of 23, which doesn't look as good in the thumbnail. So, we're just gonna leave it at that. We're not gonna talk about the part numbers, but in case you were counting, this is part 7 of 23. Last time, well, actually not the last time we left off. Last time we left off, there was a bit of a mistake. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. But the last time was Napoleon's greatest blunder in Spain. And now we're going to be looking at Napoleon defeated Aspern 1809 and how Napoleon's conquest, I believe, into Austria at this point. So, yeah, let's have a look at this one. The order is here. Like I said, if you know, you know. Without further ado, let's get into it.
March collaboration, supported by our sponsor, Osprey Publishing.
Turn it down just a little bit, because their audio levels are
In 1809, France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, was the most powerful nation in Europe. But the French Emperor's invasion of Spain and Portugal the previous year had failed to deliver the easy victory he'd expected. And with many of Napoleon's best troops and commanders now tied down in Spain, an old enemy prepared to challenge France once more.
Let's go. Austria time.
Austria had been preparing for war with France since her last humiliating defeat at Austerlitz in 1805.
4 years earlier.
With Napoleon busy in Spain, and a British promise of cash subsidies, plus a supporting attack in Northern Europe, it looked like the ideal time to strike. This time, Austria's armies would be led by Archduke Charles, Emperor Francis's younger brother. At 37, he was 2 years younger than Napoleon, but already had 15 years' experience of high command.
Wow.
And he was learning from past defeats. He'd begun to reform the Austrian army along French lines, copying Napoleon's corps system and introducing new infantry tactics.
And it's funny too, because, and actually this is a separate video, by the way, that's on the channel. I think this is the second video that's in the playlist. But anyways, I think it's interesting that throughout time, what eventually would lead to the downfall of Napoleon is the other countries copying his tactics and reforming significantly. It's just kind of cool to see how ahead of the curve Napoleon really was. And now in 1809, these reforms are finally, if not finished, then they have significant process on them. And it's taken 4 years now since the defeat at Austerlitz, which was a complete disaster, right? And it's been, more than a decade since his campaigns through Italy, which again, he demonstrated some of these tactics there. So it's kind of cool to see how slow some of these processes take over time to really change and reform. I think that's cool.
In the Napoleonic Wars, infantry fought in close
this really feels like a separate video already.
order, packed together, standing shoulder to shoulder. But why present such an easy target for the enemy? First, command and control. Before radios, orders had to be relayed by shouted commands, drums or bugles. Difficult enough in the smoke and din of battle. Almost impossible if troops were scattered. Second, firepower. Smoothbore muskets were inaccurate beyond about 80 yards, so volley fire, firing en masse, was the best way to inflict physical and psychological damage on the enemy. Third, morale. Soldiers were much more willing to advance into danger or hold the line if they did so together as a unit, urging each other on. Fourth, defense against cavalry. Scattered infantry were easy targets for horsemen. Only by sticking together could they fight them off.
Where's that painting from? Wait, I've seen that painting. Oh, that's gonna bug me.
Targets for horsemen. Only by sticking together.
Where have I seen that before? If I remember correctly, that is a really, really famous painting. Oh, that's gonna bug the heck out of me. Okay, anyways, let's move on.
Could they fight them off? The basic tactical unit of infantry was the battalion. A French line battalion had, in theory, 840 men, but in practice, nearer 500 to 600. Our example here has 605 men, a typical strength for a battalion on campaign. The men were divided into 6 companies, 4 fusilier companies and 2 flank companies. On the right, the grenadiers, made up of the tallest, strongest men, often detached to form elite all-grenadier units. And on the left, the voltigeurs, specialist light infantry, used for skirmishing in front of the battalion. Skirmishers moved independently, used cover, and fired at will to harass and unsettle the enemy,
Interesting.
while preventing enemy skirmishers carrying out the same task.
I guess that's kind of how warfare would then slowly really adapt, as these smaller, I guess what Americans would call squads, or what Canadians would call sections. Interesting.
Most armies also had specialist light infantry units for this role, such as the British 95th Rifles, French Chasseurs à Pied, and Austrian and Prussian Jaeger battalions. The traditional battlefield formation was the line. All companies formed up alongside each other, 3 ranks deep. Line formation maximized the number of men who could fire their muskets at the enemy, and limited casualties from artillery fire.
Right.
But it was extremely vulnerable to cavalry if it could be outflanked. And even for well-drilled troops, it was difficult to keep the line straight while advancing across broken ground.
So I can tell you from my experience in the military is that even marching on parade, when no one's firing at you and there's no weapons and you're just doing drill and just doing a parade, it's hard enough to keep 90 to 150 people in a line to march straight to do CO's parades, let alone when people are firing on broken ground in the middle of a battle. Right? So I can only imagine how difficult that would have been to actually push forward for anything.
So for maneuver and attack, battalions usually formed a column of divisions. This was a more flexible formation that allowed the battalion to advance quickly, though it presented a larger target to enemy guns, firing solid round shot that would tear through several ranks. And far fewer men could fire their muskets at the enemy. Theoretically, therefore, the battalion would deploy into line before reaching the enemy. But carrying out this slow maneuver under fire wasn't always possible or sensible.
And trying to maintain that discipline too while you're under fire.
So some commanders kept their men in column, relying on momentum to break the enemy line. This was a risky tactic that often worked against raw troops, but led to high casualties when facing better trained infantry, like British redcoats. A column could be closed up quickly to provide protection from cavalry, or if there was time, could form a square.
A hollow
With
square.
bayonets fixed, the battalion formed an all-round defence that often resembled more of a rectangle.
Yep.
Enemy cavalry could surround the battalion, but not break in, as horses won't charge a solid wall of men and steel. But an infantry square was extremely vulnerable to artillery fire, and could only move very slowly.
Yep.
Changing quickly and smoothly from one formation to another, especially under fire, required training, practice, and experience.
Yep. I mean, take it from my own experience. Like I said, when even you're just doing this on parade, it's hard enough, all right? Especially with a BMQ or something.
In 1809, the Austrian army began to use the battalion mass formation, crude but more suited to hastily trained conscripts. This was a dense column with limited firepower,
You could just rip
huge
through
vulnerability to enemy cannon.
That's what I mean.
But it could quickly close up to repel cavalry using the same principle as the square, but without the complex drill, and was much more maneuverable. Napoleon, warned by his spies that Austria was preparing for war, left Spain and raced back to Paris, arriving on the 24th of January, 1809.
Here'd be a statistic I would love to know. How much time did Napoleon spend commuting? Right? Like, obviously, you know, the methods of transportation that we enjoy, including by air and by rail. I mean, obviously, anyways, you know what I mean. how much time did this man spend in his life going from city to city? Because it seems like a running theme here is that Napoleon rushed back to a whole other side of the continent, right?
The French army in Germany, commanded by Marshal Berthier, would need urgent reinforcement. So Napoleon summoned units from Spain, called up young conscripts, and soldiers from his German allies in the Confederation of the Rhine. La Grande Armée was no longer the finely honed instrument of 1805, but with Napoleon at its head, it was still a formidable force.
Yep.
Archduke Charles ordered diversionary attacks in Poland and northern Italy, but launched his main attack against France's ally, Bavaria, on the 10th of April.
Cool.
It came a week earlier than Napoleon had expected and caught the French emperor by surprise. Charles was relying on a rapid advance, but a last-minute change of plans, torrential rain, and a slow-moving baggage train slowed progress to a crawl. Marshal Berthier was a brilliant chief of staff to Napoleon, but an indecisive field commander. His forces were too widely dispersed, and Marshal Davout's Third Corps was dangerously isolated at Regensburg. Charles ordered his corps to converge and destroy it. But on the 17th of April, Napoleon arrived at Donauwörth to take over command. He immediately ordered Davout to withdraw from his exposed position. It was too late for him to escape without a fight. Davout's Third Corps was one of the best in the Grande Armée, and in a fast-moving battle across wooded hills, the heroes of Auerstadt threw back the Austrians. Despite the heroism of General Major Liechtenstein, badly wounded, leading his troops forward. Third Corps escaped the encirclement. The Battle of Teugn-Hausen was the start of Napoleon's so-called four-day campaign. First, he used Marshal Lefebvre's Bavarian 7th Corps and a provisional corps under Marshal Lannes to drive a wedge into the Austrian army. Then he pursued its left wing towards Landshut, believing he was following the main Austrian army. French troops and their German allies stormed the town's bridge to win a hard-fought victory. But Napoleon realized that Archduke Charles was not at Landshut, and that, once again, he'd left Marshal Davout to face the main enemy force. Sending Marshal Bessières in pursuit of the Austrian left wing, Napoleon swung north, falling on the Austrian 4th Corps at Eckmühl. The French and their German allies won their 4th victory in as many days. But Charles's main force was still intact, and hoping to keep it so, he ordered a rapid retreat across the Danube. The French pursued, storming the walled city of Regensburg, which they knew as Ratisbon, with its vital stone bridge. Napoleon put Marshal Lannes in charge of the assault. When the attack faltered, Lannes threatened to lead the next charge in person, and his men, suitably chastised, took the city.
Wow.
During the siege, Napoleon was hit in the foot by a spent bullet, causing widespread alarm, but it proved to be a superficial wound.
Lucky.
Stubborn Austrian resistance had allowed Archduke Charles and his army to escape across the Danube. Napoleon had cut the Austrian army in half, but both sections now retreated in good order towards Vienna. Napoleon led his forces in pursuit, detaching Lefebvre's Bavarian Corps to deal with a popular revolt in Tyrol, and Third Corps and the Württemberg 8th Corps to guard his line of communications.
Yeah, I guess Tyrol would be a lot more loyal to the Austrian crown than it would actually to the French one. That's an interesting question, actually, because Tyrol really is, I mean, it's part of modern day Austria, and I would assume that it would have more of allegiance to the Austrian crown rather than one of the smaller German principalities. I don't know much about Tyrol specifically. Innsbruck's a really nice city, though, if you ever have a chance, but I have to think about that one.
Charles chose not to defend the capital.
I can hear him out my window.
Surrendered on the 13th of May, after a short bombardment. Instead, Charles and the Austrian army lay in wait across the Danube. Napoleon was now down to 80,000 men, facing 110,000 Austrians.
So Napoleon just took my district? Like, he didn't even... He just I want to say a bad word, but he just went away to the to the other side of the Danube just to wait, bro.
Charles's army had fought bravely
right
and well throughout the campaign, but Napoleon still had a low opinion of Austrian troops and decided to attack.
This is cool, actually, because I could visit some of these spots. They're not that far away. If it's just on the outside here.
On the night of the 20th of May.
Yeah, Kaiser Ebersdorf. Like, that's a streetcar stop. That's cool. Aspern, Essling. Yeah. Toll. Kaiser Ebersdorf. I was there, like the airport's like out here. Cool.
French engineers hastily built a series of floating bridges between the river islands of the Danube.
I can officially say that I have been to a Napoleonic battlefield site when I took the train to go to the airport. That's kind of cool. Kaiser Ebersdorf. Dope.
And French troops began to cross.
This is so cool. Like, I know exactly where this is.
By noon the next day, Napoleon had most of Massena's 4th Corps and his cavalry across the river, about 24,000 men and 40 guns, holding the villages of Aspern and Essling. Napoleon expected the Austrians to retreat once more, and that he'd only face a rear guard. But reports soon arrived that the entire Austrian army was advancing against him in 5 attack columns, 90,000 men.
Sorry, I'm still hung up on this Vienna thing. Like, this here is a set of, it says it's a part of Vienna, so I live like here-ish, right? Just to dox myself there. Right, Floresdorf, this is now part of Vienna. Leopoldau, this is now part of Vienna. So this is the end of the U6 line. This is the end of the U1 line. Yeah, so this now is all Vienna, right? So this is the Donau Canal. This is the Alte Donau, Neue Donau. So this is cool. This is really cool. Sorry, I'm nerding out on this city I love here.
And 300 cannon. The situation got even worse. The Austrians began to float heavy barges and obstacles downriver to smash through the flimsy French really bridge.
Huh.
Each time, Napoleon's only supply route was cut off for several hours, causing critical delays to the arrival of reinforcements and ammunition. The battle began around 2:45 p.m. as infantry of the Austrian First Column attacked Aspern. The village was soon under attack from 3 sides. General Molitor's French garrison clung on desperately, fighting hand-to-hand in the streets, and suffering 50% casualties.
Oh my.
To support the defenders of Aspern, Napoleon ordered cavalry to charge the Austrian Third Column. But they could not break through the Austrian infantry, closed up in their battalion mass formation. At 6 p.m.
terrifying to see that.
Archduke Charles ordered General Bellegarde's Second Column to take Aspern at any cost. Charles himself rode among the front ranks, urging the men forward. In ferocious fighting, the Austrians took the village. Napoleon immediately sent in newly arrived reinforcements to recapture it. About the same time, the Austrian Fourth Column began its attack on the village of Essling, where Marshal Lannes had taken charge of defences while he waited for his own corps to cross the Danube. The first Austrian assault was repulsed. The veteran French cavalry commander General d'Espagne led his cuirassiers in pursuit, but was hit by grape shot and died of his wounds.
Ouch.
Around 9 p.m, the Austrian Fifth Column finally arrived in position and made its first attack against Essling, which was thrown back by Lannes' troops. As night fell, firing died out across the battlefield, and men got what rest they could among the dead and the wounded.
Eesh.
Overnight, Second Corps and the Imperial Guard crossed the Danube to reinforce Napoleon's army, which now numbered 71,000 and 150 guns. But then the bridge broke again, leaving Davout's Third Corps still waiting to cross.
And their best corps, too.
Nevertheless, Napoleon decided to attack, using Second Corps to break the Austrian centre. But first, Aspern would have to be retaken. Heavy fighting broke out in the village before dawn. By 7 AM, it was back in French hands. At Essling, fresh Austrian attacks were fought off by General Lassalle's cavalry and units of the Young Guard. With both flanks secure, Napoleon launched his main attack in the centre with Lannes' Second Corps. Austrian guns poured fire into the advancing French ranks. General Saint-Hilaire, leading the attack, a hero of Austerlitz and Jena, had his foot blown off, a wound that proved fatal. Archduke Charles sent his Grenadier Reserve forward to strengthen the line. The French infantry, under torrential fire, began to fall back.
This seems like one of the closest and so far most brutal battles that I think he's fought so far. Wow, this is something else.
At this critical moment, the French bridge over the Danube was broken again, halting the vital flow of reinforcements and ammunition to Napoleon's army.
Really clever tactic by the Austrians.
By 2 PM, the French had been driven out of Aspern once more.
Yep.
Heavy fighting continued in Essling, which was briefly captured by the Austrians, then retaken by the Young Guard. Napoleon knew his army could do no more.
I was going to say.
At 4 PM, he ordered his exhausted cavalry to make a last charge to keep the enemy at bay, then gave the order to retreat.
Sucks for the cavalry
Archduke
guys.
Charles, whose own army had suffered huge losses and was low on ammunition, was content to watch the French withdraw to the island of Lobau. In the final moments of the battle, Marshal Lannes, one of Napoleon's finest commanders and closest friends, was hit by a cannonball that smashed both his legs.
Oh.
He died of his wounds a week later.
Ooh.
It was a deep blow to the Emperor.
Yep. Man. Not Lannes.
The 2-day Battle of Aspern-Essling was Napoleon's first major defeat, caused by his overconfidence and hasty planning. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and Napoleon avoided a much greater disaster only because of the exhaustion of the Austrian army. The French Emperor had learned new respect for the Austrians. Under Archduke Charles, they had fought bravely, with greater confidence, organization, and leadership. Within days of his defeat, Napoleon had summoned reinforcements to join him on the Danube, and begun planning his revenge.
Yep. This was
if you'd like to learn more about Napoleon...
This is not going to be the end at all. I think if I remember correctly, well, I won't spoil it, but, you know, let's just say maybe I can see the French troops from here. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for joining me on this one. And yeah, got not much else to say. Let's keep going on this one. Let's keep going on the series. I'm going to do the next 2 videos. Yeah, kind of 2. Again, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. All the best. Take care. Let me know what you thought down below in the comment section. Thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. Till the next one. Take care.